Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, we're going to talk about potential rule changes that the CFL could look at to improve things like game flow and scoring across the CFL. But really quickly, before we get started, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting the like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I greatly appreciate it, guys. We're looking to hit 500 subscribers by the start of the CFL season, and I would greatly appreciate you guys if you're not subscribed already, if you can go ahead and do so. But with that said, let's get started. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about potential rule changes today because it's in the news again lately. There's been rumors that there are stakeholders within the league, rumored to be Genius Sports, the new technology partner of the CFL, that the league is considering a push to go to 4 downs. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk about different rule changes that the league could use to, implement to improve game flow and scoring across the league without changing something so fundamental such as, the number of downs. And first, I just wanted to say that I'm not going to pretend to take credit for these ideas. I've seen these ideas floated about on Twitter, on, 3 Down Nation, other people around the CFL have suggested different rule changes. So I just wanted to discuss the viability of a lot of these changes and some of the ramifications it could have on the game. So the first one I want to talk about was actually discussed by Stampeders GM John Hufnagel, and Hufnagel is just a very experienced guy around the CFL, very well respected. So when he talks, people do listen. And what he suggested was narrowing the hash marks. So just to explain to people that don't really know the terminology, the hash marks are basically where the football is going to be snapped and how, far left or right on the field it can be snapped. So Hufnagel has suggested narrowing these that wouldn't allow one side of the field to be so wide. And basically what we've seen throughout CFL history is that teams a lot of the time are afraid to throw to the field side, which is the side that has more more grass, because that is a very long throw in the CFL, very difficult throw. A lot of times teams ignore that side of the field, especially to that perimeter receiver that's playing that side of the field. And so if you narrow the hash marks, it could open up the playbook, across the board in that sense. And so I think this is actually a no-brainer move. I think this is the type of move that the CFL can make that wouldn't change the game so drastically and would probably increase scoring as well. So I think this is a no-brainer for the CFL to implement. And I think when guys like Hufnagel are talking about it, I think it's pretty realistic that the CFL could implement this, as soon as next season. I'll also add that it could open up the kicking game as well, especially on punt returns, because you'll be kicking from more of the middle of the field. So it could allow for returners to have a lot more space to operate with, because the punter has to kick it farther to the sideline to, keep them contained. So I'm really interested to see if this actually does get implemented, but I think it's a no-brainer, like I said, for the CFL. Next, I want to talk about the Canadian player ratio and just potential adjustments that could be made to this. And I've seen this suggested. I've seen, both ends of the spectrum. I've seen people suggest that we should increase the ratio, more Canadian players, or we should decrease it. Some people have suggested getting rid of it altogether. And there's other people that suggest that it should be positionally restricted. You shouldn't be able to start so many Canadians on the offensive side. You should have to start a certain amount of Canadians on the defensive side as well. And the thought is that, it could increase scoring, and because the talent pool is not as deep in Canada, that you potentially could see more scoring if you start more Canadians in the defensive side, and then you're not relying as heavily on those Canadian offensive linemen that, it's kind of been oversaturated over the years, because that's kind of been the marquee position that you start Canadian players is at offensive line. Almost every team in the league starts 3 or even 4 in some cases. I've seen teams throughout the years even start 5 Canadian offensive linemen, and depending on that strategy, I feel like the supply-demand is kind of out of whack right now. So I understand where people are coming from that perspective, but I don't see changes to the ratio all that likely. Currently, teams have to start 7 Canadians on game day and then dress like half of their roster. I think it's 20 Canadians that have to be dressed on game day. And I think that's where you could see an adjustment. I think 7 starters is fine. I think that's pretty well balanced, 7 out of the 24, and teams can still start more if they want to. I think what you could adjust is potentially just the number of depth players that you have to have as Canadians, because I'm in favor of seeing Canadians become stars in the CFL, and, nobody really cares about the special teams guys to be honestly, like on a regular basis. I like to keep those starting spots reserved, but I think you could potentially get that down to like 15 or 16 Canadians that you have to dress overall on game day, because I don't think there's a whole necessity to have that many depth players that are Canadian. I don't think it's going to really move the needle too much in terms of fans. So keeping more flexibility for teams to keep potentially more talented American players on the roster, I think makes a lot of sense for the CFL. But I don't think any changes to the ratio are all that likely, as I just mentioned. I just don't think it's an issue that the CFL wants to visit because it's just so controversial from a lot of perspective. And like I said, there's people that want to increase the ratio as well. So I mean, I even saw a comment on Facebook the other day saying, let's get rid of all the American players in the league. Well, that's not going to happen. But I mean, again, I don't think changes are very likely to the ratio, and that's why I don't think this is a very viable path for the league to go forward. And also, I don't think it's going to make that big of an impact in terms of, improving things like game flow and scoring. The next one I want to talk about is potential changes to the motion that players can have before the snap. So currently, you have to have 7 players on the line of scrimmage at the snap on the offensive side, obviously. So 1 receiver on either side of the offensive line has to be on the line of scrimmage at the snap. And what I've heard people suggest is just make sure all of the receivers can move before the snap. And I think the reason why we haven't seen this implemented is just from a practicality standpoint, that the refs have to keep track of who's, going offside and whatnot. And we still see, even with the waggle as it is today, with the motion before the snap, you see missed offside calls all the time by refs. It's just an incredibly hard thing to ask them to do. And when you add 2 more receivers that can potentially run across the line at the snap, I mean, it's really hard to keep track of if you're a CFL ref. So I understand why they haven't gone to this over the years, even though I think it would be fun. I just think from a practicality standpoint, like I said, it's going to be really hard to implement. So I don't see unlimited receiver motion coming forward in the CFL anytime soon. I think it's fine the way it is. I think, having the slot backs move before the snap, and having the 2 perimeter receivers, I think is fine. Next, I wanted to talk about moving the goalposts to the back of the end zone. And I mean, this is a common complaint to people that are new to watching the CFL that I talk to, and they say, it's just stupid to have it at the front of the end zone. It blocks potential throwing lanes. I mean, we saw that in the 2019 West Final when Cody Fajardo, potential game-winning touchdown pass or game-tying touchdown pass, goes off the upright and the game's over, right? So I get the complaints with that and the frustration with that, but this is one I'm not entirely in favor of, because I think what really is the defining aspect of the CFL, or one of the defining aspects of the CFL, is the kicking game. And I think having those missed field goal returns is some of the most exciting plays in the CFL. And ultimately, I think, it's not really practical in the CFL unless you change the end zone dimensions as well to move them all the way to the back. It's going to make it a much more difficult field goal. And then if you move them to the back, again, you eliminate the possibility really for returns from missed field goals. So I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think it's very practical from that sense. I heard the guy from 3 Down Nation, I think it was JC Abbott, that suggested this. Really good follow over on Twitter. But he suggested that maybe it would, convince teams to go for it more in the red zone, and because when you're attempting a field goal in the red zone, that is a freaking long field goal if it's 20 yards deep in the end zone with the current CFL end zone dimension. So I'm really interested to see if this ever gets discussed, but I really don't think it's going to happen. I think it's one of the more defining aspects of the CFL to have the goalpost at the front of the end zone, even though it might piss some people off. Okay, so this next one I am very passionate about, and I think the CFL desperately needs to implement and enforce this, and that is the play clock. And the CFL's play clock is 20 seconds compared to the NFL's 40, which gives people the illusion that the CFL is a much faster game. But ultimately, what you're missing out on is the fact that that play clock outside of the final 3 minutes of each half does not start until the ref whistles that in. So sometimes when that clock is running, you get like a 10, 15 seconds off the clock before they whistle to start that play clock. And so it's effectively a 30, 35 second play clock. And ultimately that slows the game down. They have to wait for substitutions to happen, and I get you have to have that. But ultimately, you have all this extra time that is wasted off the clock, so it's not really a 20-second play clock. It's kind of a myth in a way. And this has become a major issue for pace of play in the CFL in recent years. Like, reffing crews just haven't been on the ball in terms of getting that ball spotted and whistled in time, wasting so much seconds off the clock. And ultimately, this takes away from how many plays we see in a game, ultimately how much scoring we see in games, how many possessions we see for each team in games, and ultimately that doesn't win for anybody in the CFL. So ultimately, I think this needs to be better enforced. I think that potentially you increase it to a 30-second play clock that starts exactly when the ball is down, so you have to have a really quick huddle and then really get up to the line. So I think that is a potential solution to this, and really changing the pace of play around the CFL. Either that or have kind of a grace period after the ball is down. Maybe have like a 5-second where the clock stops and gives the refs a little more time to, get that ball spotted and whistled in. So you don't waste so much time just due to, administrative errors really around the league. So ultimately, I think this is something that really needs to be enforced in the CFL. It's taking away again from the pace of play and ultimately the scoring around the league. And I think you could also have a designated spotter to just basically run the ball out and spot it every play. And ultimately, I think there's many solutions to this. The CFL just needs to do something about this to encourage the pace of play and ultimately the scoring about it, because again, we have that illusion that the CFL is a much faster game, and it is from a perspective that there are more possessions for each team in the CFL game, and you can get a punt after 2 plays, but you also just waste so much time. I saw a thing, I think it was Nelson Hackowich on Twitter with the Rod Peterson show. He said that he did the number crunching, and he said that on average, there are more plays in an NFL game than there are a CFL game, and that makes no mathematical sense when you consider the 20-second play clock. So I think this is something that the CFL desperately needs to address going forward. Now, lastly, I just wanted to brush upon this 3 versus 4 down debate once again on this channel. I've talked about it before, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate my position on it, and I've been open to this. I've been one of those people that said I will watch whatever football is, professional football is available in Canada. 3, 4 downs, I'll watch anything. If the CFL changes, I will still watch. But ultimately, I don't think they have to change it. I think, like I said, all these other rule changes in the video are on the table for potentially, improving the game flow in the games and some of the problems we've seen in recent years, because scoring, let's face it, has been on the decline in the last few years in the CFL. So that's something that the CFL needs to look at, because, when you look at them versus the NFL's trajectory, historically the CFL has been more higher scoring than the NFL, but the NFL has just been on a constant uptick in terms of offensive production over the years, especially in recent years, whereas the CFL is kind of, has flattened out and is actually declined a little bit in the last few seasons here. So I think that, there are other things that you need to look at, and there's changes that you have to make, but I think changing 3 downs, again, there has to be so much due diligence done in terms of studying what the effects would be in terms of the other aspects of the game, because, you effectively could rip up the history book, basically, if they go to 4 downs, because I think, offenses are going to really shatter a lot of records. But I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I just think in terms of the context of the history of the league, it could really ruin that. But rule changes that I've discussed throughout this video are much more likely to be put in place in the near future than a change to 4 downs, because I think a lot of it could be a domino effect. Again, like the changes to the 4 downs could potentially affect other areas of the game. You talk about, the field size. You might have to adjust that because it might become so offensive dependent. I think one thing you'd absolutely have to eliminate if you went to 4 downs is that yard off the ball, because you'd have to give the defenses some kind of, edge too, and getting basically 9 yards on 3 plays, give you a 4th and 1 situation, and teams would still go for it in that 1 yard situation like they currently do on 3rd and 1 in the CFL. So I think there's a lot of implications, and that's why I don't think this change is going to happen anytime soon. But with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Once again, my name is Jason. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting the like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I greatly appreciate it, guys. Be sure to let me know all your thoughts in the comment section about potential rule changes around the CFL. I know it's a very topical discussion these days. We're kind of getting into kind of a dead point here in the off season, right before the draft here. So I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Hope everyone has a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.